Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to show you what I found as I searched Jehovah in General Conference going back to 1942. I also looked up a few other words and found a couple kind of interesting things. So before we get into that, just want to show you the update with the Book of Mormon challenge. It's actually gone up quite a bit from yesterday. In fact, it's gone up. The number of copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared has gone up more than 100. We went from 4318 to 4429. Part of that is because I have been going through my Instagram and Facebook messages that I've neglected for so long. I'm going to try and do better with that. There were a few people that were reporting from there, but all the rest of it is from comments and then recent emails. So that is quite a bit. And the number of shares has gone from 359 to 70. So that's up by 11. So that's good too. So keep that up. Please make this number go up, the number of shares, because so much more can be done. With 15 more than 15,000 people subscribed to this channel, come on, we can do a whole lot more. If you're watching this, please share a copy of the Book of Mormon. It's so easy to do. And the idea, of course, is to bring people into the fold of Christ. And so far, 2 people have. So it's amazing. And hopefully these other, I guess, 13 people, if you minus 2 from that, 13 people, hopefully they will too. So pray for them. Okay, so back to this. Oops, wrong one. Let's go back to... Oh, no, I just go over here. Okay. And by the way, thank you everybody for well wishes and advice about my cough. This is something that's been going on for a few months now. It probably is something like asthma or something like that. I realize that I've been drinking the apple cider vinegar, but that hasn't helped so far. Um, I just want to say, I keep getting comments about it. I know it's probably annoying. Like I've said a million times, though, I'm waiting to see my doctor, which will be next Monday. So I am doing something about it. I'm not just neglecting it. So please just realize I'm going to go see the doctor. It takes time. I don't feel like it's urgent enough to where I need to like go to, urgent care or anything like that. So just let me see my doctor on Monday and we'll get it all figured out. Okay. It's going to be okay. All right. So Jehovah, as you can see here, okay, from 2009 until, uh, the most recent 2022, there was a spike in talking about using the name Jehovah in general conference talks. 7 general conference talks in 2020. Now, this happened again before that in 2016. Okay. So it's not like it was like way off the charts, like over here when you're looking at Covenant Path and there's just this big dark red block right here. It's not like that. But there's a spike. And this is what I'll say. What I've noticed with probably the majority, probably like 80 to 85% of all these terms, there's a spike in the year 2020. Now, I haven't been able to go through and put down which general conference it was that produced all these because that would just be a little bit too much. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I can do that in the future, but that's going to be pretty labor intensive if I try and do that. So it's just easier to do it by year. But I'm thinking that most of these times, when these terms show up in 2020, probably a lot of them are coming from the April 2020 General Conference, right? So let's go back in time and see what it looks like as you go back. 2005, there was a big spike of 10. That was during the time of President Hinckley. And then also during President Hinckley's time, in the year 2000. In the year 2000, there was 9, which is more than 2020. That's another year that sometimes will spike. It's because it's the year 2000. It's the turn of the millennium. And I know that many of you probably won't agree with the timing. You don't agree with the Gregorian calendar. You don't agree with when Christ was born. And I understand that. I know that you have your reasons. But from what I have seen, and what I have researched, okay, it seems like the church and church leaders do accept the Gregorian calendar as correct and believe that Christ was born April 6th of the year 1 BC. 1 BC because you go 1 year, so you go from 1 BC to 1 AD. There's no year 0. And in the year 1 AD, that's when he's 1 years old, right? So, and I tend to think that the Lord has probably done things, even if we come to find out that it's not exactly correct. I think that so things are simple for people to understand, he probably just goes by our calendar. It's something that we understand. It's the type of thing where it's the same concept, I think, as the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Like that same spirit where it's like he wants to work with us in a way that we can understand. And not everybody, in fact, the vast majority of people are not going to go back and try and calculate the calendar and figure out when the correct date is or whatever. So, either way, it seems like the church leaders accept it as correct. And then additionally, even if it's not, the Lord is probably using these dates and stuff. Okay, so when we're looking at the year 2000, excuse me, it was a significant year, and there was a lot of talk about it in general conference. Uh, in fact, I think we've gone over that before on the channel. If you want to, I would recommend this. I have a dedicated playlist just for this timeline or for this phrase tracker. Okay. If you're new to the channel, if you've missed it, you really should consider watching this playlist because we've been able to pull out all sorts of very, very interesting things from the tracker, from all these different phrases and words and terms. Okay. So far, I have 48 videos in this playlist. But I mean, we go over all these different terms, and some of them are just so telling. You know, just as a quick example, look at this right here, column N, invite you. You see this really dark block of red right here? Since 2017, maybe arguably since 2016, there's been a lot of inviting going on compared to the past. Look at the past. There's nothing even like it as far as inviting you goes, right? So it's like now is a time of action. Now is a time of action. Um, Let God prevail. That's like a recent kind of thing of President Nelson's. Um, Global. For some reason, last year, 2022, it was I think it was the biggest year for talking about King Benjamin. So maybe in your personal studies, you might want to look into that. Hear him. Look at that for the last 3 years. So, and there's just a lot more. There's so many. I don't know how many terms I've looked up, but quite a few. Quite a few. Okay, so Jehovah. So the year 2000. Okay, that was a spike year for Jehovah. I don't know why. It may be that they had, the second coming on the mind, you know, recognizing that this is approximately the time of the opening of the seventh seal. I'm not so sure that there's a specific event that did that. I know that there's other popular timelines that propose that idea, and it could be right. I don't know, it could be right. What I will say is that Salt Lake City, just a few months before New Year's, it was August of 1999. Salt Lake City downtown, there was a tornado, and the tornado went through Temple Square. It kind of nicked the temple a little bit, and I think that kind of highlighted just the fact that we're going into this new that at that time we were going into this new millennium, and so many things have happened since then. So I don't know why necessarily the spike in using the name Jehovah in that year, but I'm going to guess that it's not insignificant. But I mean, you be the judge on that. Uh, there's quite a bit of talk of that in the early to mid 90s for some reason. 1985 saw a spike. And then in the 70s, now this is what's weird. You see the sevens right here? Well, maybe it's not that big of a deal. I don't know, but it's kind of a heavier time. Like, let's zoom out. Let's go to 100% and just look at the colors. So there's a little bit of a spike up here centered on the year 2020. And then 2005 and 2000. And then the early 90s, um, and then one in 1985. And then there's kind of like a heavy area right here in the 70s. One thing that I've noticed, um, especially when it more has to do with the second coming, when I'm looking at phrases that have to do mostly with the second coming, there's usually a really h- high frequency of second coming terms in the 70s. And sometimes it bleeds into the early 80s, sometimes it bleeds into the late 60s. But the central point is typically the 70s. So, for example, look right here. Look at last days. You can see that in the 70s, there was a lot of last days talk. There was a lot of Jerusalem talk. Even before, oh, wait, no, the Six Day Wars was in 1967. So that might be why. But even before 1967, there was a lot of Jerusalem talk. Um, Let me see if I can find any other easy examples. Flood, right here in the 70s, talking about um, Noah's flood. Let's see. Just see if I can find anything. It happens time and time again, but sometimes you have to look closely at each thing. Look at second coming right here. You have a bunch of sevens and an eight. And then after that, it just kind of like dies off right here. You see that? And then it comes back to life in 2018 in a big way, in a way that hasn't been seen since, well, the 70s, specifically 1974. So you have to wonder, when using the name Jehovah in general conference, why does it seem to be following that same pattern? Why would, because by association, you might say if you have a term that's really high frequency in the 70s and then also the last few years, that the common thread between those terms is the second coming, because all the other terms basically have to do with the second coming. So is the name Jehovah, is that kind of a second coming term? Second coming in the sense that that's Christ's pre-mortal name. It's his sacred name. The Jews don't say it in Hebrew. It's Yahweh. Um, but maybe like as Christ is on his approach, as he's about to make his appearance for the second coming, maybe this is just one of the sacred names that we would use in thinking about him among his many other titles and names. I don't know. Let me know if you have any ideas. Put it in the comments below. So anyway, you go uh, down before the 70s, and it really lightens up. You only see like threes and fours, and fives. There's like 1 6 right there in the late 60s, and then it just kind of dies off down here. And that's another common thing, is that in the 40s and 50s, but especially the 40s, there isn't hardly any mention of a lot of these things. Like, it really gets really thin once you get down into the early 50s and the 40s. Like, to the point where it's almost like they aren't even talking about anything, second coming or otherwise. But anyway, so that's Jehovah. Now, let me show you the next term that I looked up. For this one, I'm going to zoom in, go to the left. Destruction. This just kind of came to me. I was like, I wonder if there's a higher frequency of using the word destruction in recent years, maybe as a warning. Okay, so this is what I found. So you can see that in the 40s, now it's kind of like reverse. Destruction is all the talk in the 40s. I haven't gone through to look at the context of each and every time, every instance. I kind of was like skimming through it a little bit. A lot of it seemed to be talking about the future, not necessarily what was happening at that time, which was World War II, but maybe just destruction was on the mind. I don't know. But let's advance forward in time. So basically, a big dark red block from 1942 to 1950, and then a smaller dark red block in 53 and 54. Then it kind of lightens up, but not for long, from 58 to, I don't know, maybe 70, well, maybe till 1979. There's another dark red block that appears. Now that fits the pattern, high frequency in the 70s, but not for the 40s. So I can only assume that some of it is because of the destruction taking place because of World War II, but I know that not all of it was. There was some of it that was in reference to the future or talking about the scriptures and destruction that was, um, that happened to civilizations of the scriptures, like the Nephites and stuff, which I think that whenever they talk about those things in General Conference, they're talking about the Nephites, they're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem or whatever. It's not necessarily just a retelling of a story, it's a warning. It's a warning to us. It's a warning to our nation. It's a warning to your nation. It's a warning if you're from another country. It's a warning to the world and the nations of the world that, unless you change your ways, destruction is coming. Now we know that destruction is coming anyway because that's what's going to happen in the second coming. But um, when we're thinking about like the judgments of God and the angels that are now able to to hurt the earth, it's a warning. It's a warning. So, okay, let's go up. Let's see what the 80s look like. Relatively speaking, relative to the previous decades, the 80s is kind of light, with the exception of 1986. Okay, look at the 90s. In 1990 and in 1999, there are spikes, but the 90s are probably the lightest decade, or at least this is like the longest span of time of such low frequency of the word destruction. Okay, in the 2000s, it's worse than the 90s. It's not the worst, but it's definitely heavier than the 90s with uh, a spike in 2009. Okay, the 2010s, relatively light. Pretty similar, if not better, than the 90s. And then in the 20s, starting off pretty light. So this kind of like goes against the pattern. Um, let's zoom out. I know it might it might be kind of hard to see, but look at the very far left right here, this column right here, and just pay attention to the colors. So from like the 1970s and going backward, it's just all dark. It's just dark, 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 dark. Lots of destruction talk from 1942 to about 1979. And then there's a few little spikes, 1990, 1999, 2002, 2003, 2009, and that's kind of it. So I'd like to hear your opinion on this because, all these things seem to follow patterns. It's not just like random. It's not just random. There's a trend. You can see a trend right here. So do you think that, from the 70s going back, there was so much destruction talk because it was a warning for right now, for our time, for the decades afterward? That's one thing that kind of, you know, sticks out in my mind, maybe. Otherwise, maybe they're just kind of using a lot of destruction talk because you had like the Vietnam War, the Korean War, um, the Cold War was going on, and then going back to the 40s, you have World War II. I'm not exactly sure. But one other thing that I could point out is you can see that although it's not a spike on the level of 2009 or 1999, there is a little bit of a spike in the year 2020. 2020 is one of those years that there always tends to be, if not a big spike, at least a little spike in that year. You see that because the years before was really quiet from 2017 to 2019, but 2020 it ramps back up. So I don't know. It's just interesting. It's just I don't know. It's just interesting. Now there's one more thing I decided to look up, and that is angels. Okay. This is on my I have two phrase tracker tabs. One is called timeline phrase tracker, and then the other one is timeline phrases high frequency terms. The reason why is because these are terms that show up a lot more frequently in general conference, like repent. There's just like a billion different instances of repent showing up in general conference. So I use a different conditional formatting on this spreadsheet, um, just to kind of keep it all uniform. So it has to do with like the color coding, basically. I could try and squeeze it all here, but I'd have to do each individual column. I like doing it this way better. That's all. Okay, so angels, let's zoom in. Well, you can see, here you go. In 2020, once again, there's a spike of 15. You have to go back to 2011 to see anything that high. The years in between are relatively low, maybe except for maybe 2017. But so you have some darker coloration right here in the 20s for angels. Okay. And then here's like another clustering right here from 2008 to 2011. Excuse me. All right, going back, a little bit of a cluster kind of right here in the early 90s and then in the late 80s. This is just, rough. It's not exact. Here's kind of a spike right here in the early 80s, early 70s, and kind of, well, I guess you could say from roughly 1963 to 1973. That, again, that kind of fits the pattern of like the spiking of terms during the 70s. And then you go back even further, a little spike right here in 1954. And then as usual in the 40s, hardly anything. So even angels uh, pretty much follows the same trend of high frequency in the 70s, maybe a couple other little spikes, and then picking back up within the last few years. Although in this case, for some reason, there was a lot of angel talk at the beginning of President Monson's presidency, his first 4 years. So, but it is a pretty dramatic difference when you compare the year 2019 to 2020, because it almost doubles the talk of angels. What comes to mind for me is the idea that going to the temple and coming back out, you have angels that have charge over you when you go to the temple. So I know there's been a lot of talk about going to the temple, making and keeping covenants, and maybe now's the time where we just really need some extra protection in the form of angels. I don't know. Again, I would submit this to you for your interpretation. Do you think that that's right? Does it stick out to you at all, or do you think that these are just kind of like, I don't know, just how do you interpret all this? I think basically what I've said, I think that it's right. 2020 Definitely a very, very important year. It's really stuck out. And so far, we haven't had another year like it. Now, we're now in the year 2023. We're less than a month away from our next general conference. So once we get to that general conference, I'm going to, and once they update it on the Scripture Citation Index, because that's the website that I use to search for all these. And let me just show you really quick in case you're new. I'll put a link for this website in the description below. This is a website by BYU. It's called the Scripture Citation Index. There's a number of different things that you can do here, but the way that I look for these words is you click on search at the bottom right, and then you unclick these bottom three. So you're just looking at general conferences. It only goes back to 1942, so that's why it's like that on my tracker. And then you just look up whatever you want to look up. So, put in quotations, second coming, and that'll find that exact phrase, second coming. And then I just count up the years right here. An easy way to do that is you just do Control F and then type in 2022, and then it'll show you that there's 4 right here. Or you can count the highlights. Sometimes you have to do that because, like, for example, that year may show up in the body of the text or the body of the talk itself, referring to like a previous year. So, like, for example, maybe this talk right here, Covenants with God, Strengthen, Protect, and Prepare Us for Eternal Glory by Jean B. Bingham. She may have said, 1974 while telling a story. And so you have to just you just have to watch for that, essentially. There's like a couple times that'll come up. So that's what I do. I just take a tally of the talks, and then I just put it right here. If you want to see this spreadsheet and just take some time and look at it yourself, this is in the cloud on my Google Drive, and there's a link for it in the description of each video. So go down to the description box and then click on the link, and then you can view this. You cannot change anything. Sorry, I can't allow anybody to change anything because that could become a situation pretty quick. But you can copy this stuff, and if you want to copy it, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. So feel free to look at that. Again, going back to this, please share copies of the Book of Mormon with your friends, family, and others. It's easier now than ever. You don't have to give out physical copies. I mean, you can do that, but just go to the Gospel Library app and go to Scriptures, and then at the top there's a button. You click for share, click on share, and then you can share it any way that you want to. Email, text, direct message on Facebook, whatever. Go through your contacts. Just something is better than nothing. Even if you haven't talked to them for a long time, still send it, because you never know if the Lord may have prepared them for that exact moment. Maybe they've been prepared for you to send them the Book of Mormon. So just do it. And then let me know. Put it in the comments, put it in an email. Make sure that your message is short and simple, just so it's easier for me to find, instead of putting it in the middle of a big story, because then it's harder for me to find it. And that's going to be it. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it. And I'll talk to you guys later.